You guys have been asking me to cover the safe version of the Bluey infection AU, and since Ice Star Unknown just released parts 1 through 42 with voice acting, I think this is the perfect time to go ahead and go over it. Now, from my understanding, the first half of the animation is going to be the same as the Sacrifice AU, and it doesn't actually split until you have to make a choice in the woods when the kids are playing hide and go seek. But I will do a quick recap for the people that may not know what's going on, or for the people that just haven't watched the Sacrifice AU. Now, the infection in this world came to be because there was a kiddie pool that had still water inside, and it had been sitting in the yard for so long that it started to gather bacteria. Unfortunately, that bacteria ended up making its way into the food of Rusty and his family, causing the young pup to get infected, and then he began to actually attack his own family. After that, we start to see reports pop up on the news talking about the violence in the streets, and while Bluey's family tries to barricade themselves in their home, they end up being forced to flee after Bandit is bitten. Chili takes her children and her sister and they head over to the grandfather's house, which seems to be safe. And wanting to get more survivors together, Chili decides to call Muffin's family and tell them to come up and link with them. And once all the kids are together, they decide to go out and play hide and go seek. And this is where the story begins to divert from the Sacrifice AU. Because when Bluey is running from the infected, she has two options. The Sacrifice AU is if you choose option B, which basically means that she sacrifices herself in order to give the other kids a chance to get away. While the safe AU begins if you go ahead and click option A, which basically just means that Bluey says F those other kids and she saves herself. Now in the Sacrifice AU, this is where Bluey actually gets bitten, but since she decided to book it to the house in this version and only worried about herself, she's actually able to make it to her grandfather before the infected can bite her. And once she gets into the house, it seems like her mother finally starts to explain what's actually happening in this new infected world, which is definitely a step up from what they did in the Sacrifice AU. Now after that scene, we see that Chili's group has been recruiting more survivors and has even went back and picked up Bandit so that they can do some experiments on him. And two things stood out for me here. The first is that Bandit is spitting up like this white bacteria, which makes sense considering that he is infected. The second thing that stood out to me is that while Bandit appears to be calm at the moment, that doesn't mean that he'll be calm moving forward. Because if you remember in the Sacrifice AU, Lucky was very calm when he came to the door to greet Bandit. But it only took a few seconds for his infection to progress, and then he just went rabid and attacked him. So I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened with Bandit here, especially because he is like further along than Lucky was. In the next scene, we see that Bandit is able to speak briefly.
We need you to put on a collar for me. Can you move?
Can't move. Pain. Help.
And then we see that Chili is actually able to get this special collar onto his neck that allows her to safely take hair and possibly blood samples. But when they go into the room, Bandit actually starts to transform. They attempt to shock him, but it doesn't seem to be enough to actually stop him, and they are forced to put Bandit down. And sadly, that's where everything starts to go downhill for the crew. Shortly after the death of Bandit, Infected found where Bluey and her family were held up and attacked them, forcing them to run to like a underground bunker. And seeing that they were almost overrun, Chili decided to stay behind and she tried to hold off the infected. The good news here is that she does actually manage to allow the other people to escape, but she is not able to make it to the bunker herself. It looks like the infected actually got her right when she made it to the bunker door, which is pretty sad because that means that she was actually pretty close to making it to safety. At this point, Uncle Stripe and Grandpa are the only characters that know about Chili's death, and they debate on if they should actually tell the girls or not. But when they consider the fact that Bandit also died today, they decide to wait a little while before breaking the bad news, which I can't really blame them for. Because if we're being honest, losing both parents in one day is like Batman level bad luck. But this is where things go from bad to worse. We see that Bluey wakes up in the middle of the night and decides that she's gonna go out and try to find her mother. And since none of the adults are actually on watch, she's able to just walk out of the bunker. Which when you really think about it, is bad on a couple of levels. Not only was she just able to walk out of the bunker, but she also could have let infected in. And if that was to happen, some people would probably be dead before they even had a chance to wake up. I feel like they definitely should have had the adults like on sleeping shifts so that they could have been keeping an eye out. Next we see that Bingo wakes up and starts to look for Bluey, who we then see is now running out in the woods. When Bingo wakes up the other adults, they come up with a plan to try to figure out where Bluey might be, and then we're hit with the current stat sheets. And even though Bingo is scared here, she's actually pretty well fed and doing a lot better than I expected. Bluey, on the other hand, has her sanity down to just 10%, which makes sense considering that she's running for her life through the woods, constantly being chased by infected. And as we already knew, Chili and Bandit are both gone. The grandfather seems okay, but one thing that stood out to me is how hungry he is. And I assume it's because he's probably giving the bulk of the food to the children, which is why their hunger levels still seem to be pretty good. Next, we see Aunt Frisky try to engage the kids in a game so that they won't be thinking about the fact that Bluey is outside, and so that she can kind of calm them down a little bit. And surprisingly enough, it does seem to work, and she's actually able to get the kids to go to sleep. We then move over to the grandpa, and we learn that he sent out Uncle Stripes to look for Bluey.
Stripe? Bluey! Bluey! Where is that kid? Uncle Stripe! You're okay!
I'm so glad to see you're safe. What were you thinking, leaving all by yourself? Wait, for now, it's not important. Let's find our way back.
I just wanted to see Mama.
And I was actually surprised to see that he was not attacked by any infected, especially since he was making so much noise. But at the moment, it seems like everything is working out for these two. Now, back in the bunker, we see that everybody is gathered together, and we learn that they have about a month's worth of food left, which isn't too bad, all things considered. And while the kids do seem to be getting restless, at least they're safe. Or so they thought until they heard this loud bang echo through the bunker. And when Grandpa goes to check it out, he sees two infected are outside. With that knowledge, he tries to gather everybody into a room so that they can quietly hide, but Bingo realizes that she left her stuffed animal outside and runs out of the room to fetch it. And before we can see the outcome of that, we cut back over to Bluey and Uncle Stripe. And the pair of them are almost back at the bunker at this point. And as they get closer, Uncle Stripe notices that the bunker door has been busted open. And honestly, that should have been their cue to skedaddle, but Uncle Stripe goes to check it out and sees Bingo has been torn apart. And I assume the others have as well, but since we don't get to see them here, there is a chance that maybe they escaped. But sadly, while Uncle Stripe was mourning over Bingo's body, an infected is able to jump on him. And while we don't get to see what happens right now, we can assume that at the very least, he's bitten. After that, we see Bluey hiding under a tree with her stuffed animal. And when it starts to take Uncle Stripe too long to get back to her, she decides to go check on him. And when she gets back inside of the bunker, she sees that Bingo and Uncle Stripe are both deceased. But before she has time to mourn, she hears the infected inside of the bunker and she dashes out of there. And then we are left on this cliffhanger where we don't know what will happen to Bluey or if the rest of her friends and family are alive or dead. One thing that I want to note about this Safe AU is that the name made me think that there would be like a happy ending here, but instead so many more people died in this one. And on top of that, Bluey is also pretty much left on her own. Another thing that I want to point out that I really liked about this AU is the fact that Bluey is a child, and because of that, she acts very naive, and that gets her and her family into a bit of trouble. And while it sucks to see them go through this, it does feel kind of realistic. I think about movies like The Quiet Place when that little boy steals that toy just because he wants to feel like a kid again, and it starts making noise, and then he gets snatched up. Or in The Last of Us when Sam is so happy to have Ellie as a playmate for a moment, and he maybe even has a little crush on her, of course. But in most zombie outbreaks, when there are children involved, they usually end up doing something silly that gets people in trouble. Because at the end of the day, they are just children. And I think Ice did a really good job of kind of showing that in this version of the AU. Now, my theory for the next part is that the grandfather and maybe Muffin and the others are still alive, and they're going to actually meet back up with Bluey at some point. After that, they're going to keep moving until they find a safe place, like a community of survivors or a military base. And then the animation will end with them being able to live safely in this community, hence the Safe AU name. My other theory is that later in this series, Bluey is going to have to make some choice, and I'm thinking it's probably going to be like saving the family that she has remaining or saving herself, kind of like she did earlier in this AU. And if she's basically able to prioritize her own safety, then she'll be able to remain safe. If she's not, then she'll probably end up dying along with her family. But that's just my theories for now. I look forward to seeing how the story ends. If you want to watch Ice's full video, I'll go ahead and put it here. And if you want to see the video where I covered the Sacrifice AU, you can click on this video here. As always, thanks for watching. If you are going to go check out Ice's original video, make sure to go drop her a sub. I'm pretty sure she's getting pretty close to 100K. And with that, we'll see you tomorrow with another video. Peace, peace.